The imperial economies of Spain and Portugal in the New World were marked by three features. First, control by a small minority of European elites. Secondly, commanding a large labor force composed of forced Native American or African slave workers. And thirdly, the extraction of raw materials, which were then shipped back and marketed in Europe. This map shows the course of the Spanish and Portuguese conquest and occupation of the New World. As previously indicated, the Spaniards followed Columbus across the Atlantic to what we now call the Caribbean, or the West Indies, and from that point on to Central and South America. Whereas the Portuguese, making their way south along the coast of Africa and in search of a route around the Cape of Good Hope into the Indian Ocean, swung far to the west to pick up the prevailing westerlies, and in 1500, the Portuguese navigator Pedro Cabral ran into a piece of land which we now know to be Brazil. Let's look first at the Spanish imperial economy in the New World. The cutting edge of the Spanish conquest was led by the so-called conquistadors, swashbuckling, independent, militaristic types who were in search of precious metals, most notably in their minds gold, but later they would discover silver. The conquests followed principally two paths. In 1519, the conquistador Hernán Cortés landed on the east coast of what is now Mexico and then made his way overland to the Aztec capital of what is now Mexico City. And there he discovered not only an enormous cache of gold and silver, but also the route to silver mines further north. Somewhat later, Francisco Pizarro, another of the conquistadors, made his way along the northwest coast of South America, landing in what is now Peru, and then advancing overland to the capital of the Incan Empire in what is now Cusco in southern Peru, and then on to Bolivia. Let's look more closely at Pizarro's advance into the Incan Empire. For although he was originally in search of gold, the most precious of metals, the Spanish pushed on to what is now southern Bolivia and the city of Potosí, home to the Cerro Rico, or Rich Hill, which contains a virtual pure vein of silver. Over the next 200 years, from the middle of the 16th to the middle of the 18th century, the Spanish tapped into silver mines in Mexico and what is now Bolivia to produce 85% of the world's silver production. This silver was then shipped back via the Spanish Armada to Europe and used to finance the great wars, the European wars of the 16th and 17th century, led by the Habsburg Empire, and also to finance imports from the Far East, silks and porcelains from China, calicos from India, spices from the East Indies, in one of what became the world's great integrated global trade network, financed largely by silver from the New World. So rich was Spanish silver that it became the common currency of international trade. Here, illustrated by a Spanish silver dollar in the 18th century, and then replaced after the independence of Mexico by the Mexican silver dollar, which became the common currency for trade throughout the Far East down to the 19th century. The Portuguese followed a different path, landing as indicated on the east coast of what is now Brazil. They found none of the things that the Spanish found in the Aztec and Incan empires, no large imperial organizations, no dense concentrations of Native American population, no precious metals like silver or gold. But the Portuguese found something else. They found an ecology suitable for the raising of sugar cane. Sugar cane, a natural product from which is made refined sugar, originated in Southeast Asia, was transmitted through India and the Middle East, and picked up by European crusaders in the 11th and 12th centuries, and became, by the 16th and 17th centuries, a major consumer product in Europe. The Portuguese, establishing sugar plantations on the coast of Brazil, were able to supply the enormous demand for sugar in Europe. However, growing sugarcane, cultivating sugarcane, cutting and refining the product is an enormously hard and difficult task, which most Portuguese did not want to undertake and did not have to undertake, because the Portuguese found another source of labor, not as in the case of the Spanish mines in the Native Americans, but rather by imported slave labor from West Africa. Over the course of 3 centuries, from the 16th to the 19th centuries, over 1/3 of all black African slaves who were shipped from Africa to the New World landed first in Brazil, and many of them were put to work on Portuguese sugar plantations, first in Brazil, and then migrating northward into what is now the Caribbean. In sum, the Spanish and Portuguese imperial economies were based on a small minority of European elites using a large enforced labor force of Native Americans and imported slave labor to produce extractive industries of precious metal, principally silver, and agricultural products, principally sugar, for sale abroad.